My name is Rachel Hutchinson. I'm the science director at Circle, which is the South Yuba River Citizens League. We're a watershed-based nonprofit, for those of you that aren't familiar with us, and we work across the entire Yuba watershed. Our mission is to unite the community to protect and restore the Yuba River. So when Circle started to work on this issue, which we originally called marijuana as a watershed issue, a couple of years ago, we weren't really sure who was out there in this community, and that I refer to you guys in this room as a community of farmers that are concerned with growing in an environmentally responsible way. So we started working on this issue out of a concern of this cumulative impact of over 1,000 grows or more across the watershed, and all of those pollutants, fertilizers and pesticides, and the water demand of farming in this way, that could be enormous. And we weren't really sure who was out there in the community and who wanted to come and join us in promoting a movement that was of the environmentally friendly and sustainable manner. So all of you in this room, I include you in that community of people that are excited about being environmentally friendly. We really appreciate that you're here to learn today. We're also pleased to be partnering with groups, local groups and statewide groups, like our co-sponsors, the Nevada County Cannabis Alliance and Darlene Markey at Sweetland Garden Supply. We also want to thank the Rose Foundation and the State Water Quality Control Board for their support of this program. We will be having workshops that are going to run all summer long. I think we're going to have 5. They're going to start in June, and they're going to go June, July, August, September, and October. The dates, I think, are available at the back of the room. The second Tuesday of the month. That's an easy way to remember it. And they're going to be at the Hallbrook. So please join us there for topics that are all on water conservation, keeping the water clean, and a lot of it has to do with your soil health, and also planning ahead for the future of your farm. I also need to thank a couple of other people before we get started and introduce the first speaker. We want to thank Stephen Munkholt Law, House of Harlequin, Amigo Bob's Seaweed Grow, an anonymous donor, and our media sponsor, The Union, with a special thanks to Stephanie Azevedo. So first up today, we have Hezekiah Allen, who is the executive director of the California Growers Association. He was actually one of Circle's very first partners in this program that we call Growing Green. He will be speaking today about his work at the state capitol and what I understand are brand new regulations that came out on Friday. I understand you're going to give us an update about that, so I'm pretty excited. Okay, here's Hezekiah.
Awesome. It's pretty cool to think the first time I ever came to Nevada County was actually for Growing Green all the way back in March of 2014, the first one. And so I've been completely enamored of you all in this place ever since. And thank you for having me back, and sorry for being a little bit late. Here are those new regs. So I'm just going to have them out for reference. But first and foremost, good morning, happy Sunday. Thank you so much to Circle. For those who don't know my background, I was born at home, raised off the grid in the Mattole watershed. The Mattole Restoration Council is, I think, a good sort of analog organization to Circle. And in my opinion, community-based restoration is probably the most important thing that we as a species can be doing. Watersheds are everywhere. We all exist within a watershed and within those contexts and confines, and to come together as a community to restore the productivity and functionality of those systems, like honestly, what more could we be doing with ourselves? So within that context, I was born and raised a grower, grew quite a bit of cannabis in my 20s. Before it was really cool to get together and talk about it, but I'm still recovering, and so I feel a lot more comfortable talking about it. So grew up within this context of caring deeply about a place, caring deeply about a watershed, knew that the economic activities that we need to engage in to pay our bills and to survive ultimately did have impacts, and have always been really fundamentally committed to figuring out how to mitigate the idea that there's a division between our economy and our ecology. Without fundamental productivity, both of natural systems and of our human systems, we're not going anywhere. So that's how and why ultimately I came to move to Sacramento to work on public policy with an eye for ensuring that folks like me and cannabis growers, users, manufacturers, whatever it is, could talk openly with the other folks in the community about the impacts they were having and what the best solutions were, to really try to establish a safer, more productive conversation between regulator and regulated, which I really do think is going to produce positive outcomes in the end. All of that ultimately started in 2014. There was a really horrible bill. We were successful in stopping that bill from moving forward. In 2015, we came back to the table to work on the Medical Cannabis Regulatory and Safety Act. Everybody in the room familiar with the MCRSA? Awesome. So I'm not going to get into too much detail about what it does, because we've been talking about it quite a bit over the last few years. But what I can tell you is that that piece of legislation has turned into these. These are rule sets. One of them for the Department of Food and Agriculture. So this is the one pertaining to cultivation that we'll spend most of our time on today. The Bureau, distribution, retail, testing, and then public health, my favorite, as you can tell. They've only come out on Friday. They'll all be quite colorful soon. And so this will essentially, this is the detailed rule book to all things commercial cannabis in the state of California, as proposed under the statutory authority of the MCRSA. So why it's really important to hold on to that is because there are currently two conflicting statutes. That means there are two different sections of California state law that deal with commercial cannabis activity. Of course, one of them is medical, which was passed in 2015. One of them is adult use, which was passed in November of 2016. They are not the same. These rules are derived completely from the law. And so it's very important to note that if the MCRSA and the adult use, the ALMA, if and when those are brought together, if it results in a repeal of the 19,000 code section, which is where the MCRSA is contained, these will be revoked in their entirety. So these rule sets will go away if the MCRSA goes away. That said, the agencies have assured me a few things. First and foremost, if that happens, you won't get a public comment period on the rules that come from the later statute. There just won't be time between the time they are passed in January 1st of 2018. So commenting on these is very, very important. They've also assured me that the comments that are made on these existing rules will be considered in the following rulemaking process. So before getting too into the weeds on what's in here and what isn't, which is going to be super fun, I'm going to talk a little bit more about procedure and process and how this is going to work over the next 8 months, I guess, right? Well, goodness, licensure in 8 months. Quite an amazing thing to think about. Hopefully, if your guys as supervisors get their act together. Though that may be in the balance as well. Oh wait, I'm going to be less political. I forgot, sorry. So right now, like I said, we have the 19,000 code section. That is the Medical Act. Then over here, we've got the 26,000 code section. That is the Adult Use Act. Generally, they agree, but not really. There's a lot of the same words, but they're not actually arranged the same way. So they don't say the same thing. Both of them give the regulatory agencies, those are the ones who wrote these based on the law, the regulatory agencies have what is called emergency rulemaking authority. Emergency rulemaking authority is where you make the rules and you take public comment afterward. The typical rulemaking process, which is what we're doing right now, the rules come out and then we get 45 days. So June 12th, anyone who wants to read and comment on these, June 12th is your comment deadline. So normally we see the rules, we comment, then they're revised, and then they're implemented. Under the emergency rulemaking process, it happens in the reverse order. So the ALMA was not passed until November of 2016. That's barely enough time between then and now for government to hire somebody to do something, let alone to actually do something. And so that timeline, because you had from November of 2016 until January of 2018, that's really only 14 months. That's why the regulators need that emergency rulemaking process and authority, because they simply don't have time to go through the full 45-day comment period. Right now, the governor has proposed legislation that would bring those two bills together. The governor's trailer bill, it's a trailer to the state budget. It was released maybe about 3 weeks ago. It will be passed by June 15th, according to the state constitution. If it's not passed by June 15th, the government will shut down. So usually the lawmakers get it done on time, or else, they don't get their paychecks, and that makes them grumpy. So that is the current proposal. The current proposal on the table does involve folding the two together, which again makes this go away. They start over. We see the proposed rules probably sometime in September. They go into effect. We apply for licenses as we're commenting on them. We don't know how it's going to turn out. I know a lot of times I come out here and I give you guys, I think, reasonably good forecasts. I can't forecast this one. There's 9 different contingency outcomes on our strategic chart right now. There's a lot of different ways the trailer bill and the legislative process could go. I will say this, the governor has proposed what I've heard described at, so there's a state assembly person who's about as close to Ronald Reagan as you can get in the state government. He still has a lot of that energy that was so prevalent in the 80s. And the other day in committee, he said, this is deregulated to the point of being a problem. And so to hear the deregulation champion in Sacramento saying that the governor's proposal is free market to the point where it's a problem is quite striking. So needless to say, I think the legislature is not on board with the governor's proposal. There is a big mess in Sacramento with regard to how the statutory differences will be solved. And the rules that we're going to talk about today, of course, are all pending those statutory changes. So, long way of saying, we've got 9 months, they've promised us licenses, we have no idea how we're going to get there. There's 9 different contingencies, and everything we're going to talk about today might not matter in a few weeks. Sound like fun? Awesome. So, there's a few things in here that I want to highlight, and ultimately, my thought was to take a few key themes here, and then ultimately, I know you guys probably all have questions at this point. You all know how to read and whatnot, so I'm going to highlight a few things that are especially exciting, and then just open it up. And I think, as always, I'm a pretty informal speaker, so do feel free to interrupt me if you feel interested. So, water source supplemental information. Seems pretty relevant to today's conversation, right? I figured that's a great place to start. As I mentioned, my background, and I think the background of many of our members, is such that we don't want our businesses to be an environmental issue, and water supply is a major consideration. So one of the things that we've heard a lot of people say is, oh, it's cool, I'll just get water delivered. Guess what? That's not really entirely legal under all circumstances in the state of California. But the Water Board has a pretty hard time enforcing those rules. And so the way that they've dealt with this here, anybody remember SB 837 from last year? Budget trailer bill, awesome. You are our policy committee chair, Tara. If you didn't remember the bill, we'd have a problem. SB 837 was the budget trailer bill from last year. So like I said, the governor just proposed this budget bill. It happens very quickly. I don't think anybody outside of Sacramento actually understands how our state government spends its money, which is probably reasonable. But last year, SB 83, wait, no, that wasn't reasonable, my bad. It's not reasonable that we, the people, don't understand how they spend their money, but that's okay. Last year, SB 837 passed, and it was really considered groundbreaking water policy. It was described on the floor of the state Senate as one of the most sweeping public policy changes in the history of our state, eroding our core principles, private property rights. I frankly didn't see it that way. I thought it was a pretty reasonable requirement that if you wanted to grow cannabis, you had to tell the state where your water came from and how much you were using. Relatively low-level mandate, in my opinion. And so we've got a list here Retail water supply, it really outlines delivery is not a good option, you guys, and it goes through what you'll have to give people if you're going to get water delivered. Talks about groundwater and specifically how you will need to report on your wells. My favorite thing, though, really groundbreaking for California state policy, is a requirements for rainwater catchment, and it is hands down the most streamlined option in here. So since day one, I've been telling you, store more water, and if you can't get from June to November without diverting a single drop, you're probably not in this for the long haul. And the more I look at this proposed water supplemental information requirements, there's a lot of words in that section, the more it is clear that there's going to be real challenges using a water source other than stored rainwater. The cool thing is they've made it a lot easier for us to register that water use and that storage. And so that's a good one. What else is fun in here? Oh, goodness. License fees. Everybody wants to know fees, right? No. That's fun. My favorite, the cottage outdoor fee is actually less than $1,000, $600 for the cottage outdoor. So one of the things that we've been working on all along, of course, is making it sort of affordable for smaller players to participate and tiering the fees and requirements. And so for cottage outdoor, which practically speaking is probably what your county is most aligned to do because it's such a high-end production, and also I think politically it's hopefully the most feasible. You're looking at about $1,100 between an application fee and a licensing fee. So pretty low. I think that generally speaking, we're okay with these proposed regulation with regard to fees. Department of Pesticide Regulations has not released their supplemental information yet. There is a relatively large gaping hole in the currently proposed regs that, what is it that will fail and what won't with regard to testing. I think most folks out here in my experience aren't using a lot of poisons, so it shouldn't be too bad, but we will get specific details on what poisons. It feels so weird saying what poisons are okay to put on consumable products, but that is what we will get from pesticide regs, so that's another major one that's still outstanding. Another one that we've been working on quite a bit is the microbials. Anybody here familiar with Berkeley's regs? So basically, Berkeley is failing people for using beneficial microbes. And so if you're testing at the genus level, you don't capture the subspecies level, obviously, because there's a huge difference between those two. The subspecies is actually beneficial, but the genus contains harmful bacteria, so they're failing products based on that. Thankfully, the state did not go that route. There was a moment where it looked like they might, but they continue to be more science-based. Lo and behold, the state of California is passing science-based policy. It's quite strange. There's a number of things also with regard to track and trace that you're not going to love. Premature plants, cuttings can be tagged at the lot level, meaning up to 100 cuttings or clones. But once they go into the flowering space, they magically become plants that you have to track each individual plant. So that is going to be a thing, at least for the first couple years. We're not terribly thrilled about that. One kind of exciting piece, so this square footage limit that we've been talking about, that will only include flowering canopy. And so it doesn't include on-site propagation as proposed. So if you've got some others and or some clones, you're going to be just fine having those in addition to your permitted flowering canopy. You are allowed to propagate on site, but you're not allowed to sell the clones. There's a lot in here. What are you guys curious about? Yeah, that was quick. What do you got, boss?
Cottage outdoor. What's up with the up to 2,500 square feet?
As currently proposed, there is no square footage allowance for cottage outdoor. There's also nothing that says your mixed light has to be in a greenhouse.
Okay. What are the likelihoods of, through the comment period and the back and forth period, that might get...
It's low. The statute needs to change. Their statutory authority is relatively limited in that regard. So the law would need to change.
Now, I thought that Amber had said
It's up to them to decide what authority they have.
Okay.
If I were the branch chief, I would interpret my authority based on my statutory mandate, but I am not the boss. Put it in a comment letter.
We will.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I do want to really underscore that. Even though there's all this uncertainty and even though there's all these potential outcomes, read these and put comments in comment letters. It will matter. This is very likely our only opportunity to comment on the detailed regs before January 1. So do it, even though it's going to be a weird, interesting maze to get from point A to point B. Yes, please.
Can you talk about the water board and the fees, and those are annual or one-time application and then annual fee, or and then
Trey?
also using your
We're going to have a panel on the water board later. I can speak to the licensing fees and say that they are annual fees. So it's an annual license fee. So for the cottage outdoor, looking at about $1,000 a year. It goes up. So it sort of goes up from outdoor to mixed light to indoor, and then obviously it goes up by tier 2 and size scale. And it starts at about $1,000, and then for the largest indoor license, it's about $40,000 a year. So you've got a pretty good range of costs there, and I'm pretty happy with it because small cottage growers can probably afford it, and if you're going to grow a big warehouse, then pay your fees. So it works for me. Yep. Okay, cool. This, you guys are too easy. Yeah, what's up?
Can you talk about the difference between the nursery license and the rest of the licenses?
Oh yeah, and actually that's a really cool opportunity they created a new license also. So a nursery license is not allowed to have flowering plants. The definition of flowering plant is something that I think will hold over no matter what the outcomes are. Flowering plant is a half-inch, you guys know what a female plant looks like. I forget the biological term or botanical term, but half inch, it's thoroughly showed flower at that point. Anything less than that can be grown on a nursery. Once the plant switches to flower, it has to leave. You're not supposed to flip them on the nursery site. Has to leave the site or have left before it goes into flower. You are supposed to destroy them if they start to flower at a nursery and you don't have a cultivation licensee to take them from you. The nursery fees are pretty low. I was actually surprised. They're about the same as the cottage outdoor. There is a 4-acre cap on the nursery. The nurseries are not allowed to produce products other than nursery stock and seeds, so no processing oil out of the flower spoils, anything like that. The cultivation license then is harvesting, grading, curing, processing, growing, and planting are the 6 activities, I believe, that are authorized under the cultivation license. And then they established a new license, which is for processing, which is everything but planting and growing. And so those are the 3 license types that Food and Ag will be administering. I personally, if I were out here, I would probably make a permitted processing facility somewhere in the county a very high priority from an advocacy perspective. I think that the centralized processing could start alleviating some of the more tricky impacts. Particularly cars on dirt roads are a really, really severe impact. Getting the processing, getting the workers, getting some of those road miles in to where the facilities are could probably go a long way toward minimizing some of the more significant concerns about environmental impacts. So I think that processing license it's definitely gonna stick. We know that no matter what the outcome is, they are gonna keep that processing license, and I think that will help folks a lot. So those are the 3. Anything in particular about nurseries? No? Cool. Yep. Mixed light is any artificial light not exceeding 25 watts per square foot. That's like the first time I've ever been able to answer that question with certainty because they just proposed it here. So 25 watts per square foot is your threshold, which is, we did some math, it's like almost enough to flower. If you're flowering with LEDs, it's like real close. So I think it's a pretty generous allowance. And then outdoor they actually did allow for low-intensity supplemental lighting to keep stock plants and to propagate. So even with outdoor, you do get a little bit of flexibility on lighting, but 25 watts per square foot is the magic number that separates mixed light from indoor.
Maybe to clarify, as I read it, any light gap operation would be considered mixed light, even if there are no
Yes.
artificial lights associated.
Interestingly enough, they did appear to treat light deprivation as a form of supplemental lighting. That it's, since you're pulling a tarp, and so that was my read too, is that even if you don't have supplemental lighting, if you're depping them, depriving them of light, that sort of is treated the same way as supplementing light. The reasoning here, my understanding, is when they determined the fees, the reasoning was that they tried to set the fees at, it's about 1.4% of expected gross revenue, and so mixed light is expected 3 harvest cycles a year, and so the fees are about 3 times higher. And so the determination that depping, regardless of light source, was actually going to be treated as mixed light had more to do with how the fees were being structured with regard to expected harvest. Yep.
My question was, if you have a nursery, what about growing your own personal?
If you're below the 6 plant allowance in Prop 64, I don't think it should conflict with the commercial activity at all. I would definitely keep things very well documented. I mean, obviously, I guess that's sort of the challenge of regulations record keeping. So there's like 30 pages of regs about which records to keep. It'll be cool. Yeah.
Yeah, the way I read the nursery part of it, it says something about you're allowed to have designated flowering areas as a part of your cultivation.
Right.
But it's like you're only allowed to test those on site.
It's for R&D, not for commercial sale, basically. Yeah, and so especially some of the seed breeders, you can't grow seed without flowering a plant. So I think that the restriction is ultimately that you can't sell products other than seeds or livestock. Yeah.
Are there any continuing education requirements being considered upon licensing renewals?
For owners, or there are for managing employees. So each employer will be required to have on site a supervising staff that's gone through a 30-hour training course with the Department of Industrial Relations, and or potentially a labor organization. That's still, the statute on that is still being clarified. But there will be continuing education for supervising employees, which can be owners or they can be managers depending on how the business is structured. So, and then in addition, that's the only one that's required currently, except for the labs. Then the labs have some science requirements as well. But generally speaking, labor and safety standards will be the initial one in that regard. Got a couple more minutes, yeah, boss.
In terms of the Cal Grower's mission of working to protect independent farms and protecting the environment, what were when you read the regulations for the first time, what were the biggest highlights for you that really spoke to our mission statement?
So these regs, and the reason that I gave sort of the roundabout answer that started back in 2014 is that these regs, to put it into harvest cycle terms, this is the fruit of the seeds that were planted in October of 2014. And so this goes way, way back. At the time, our priorities were regulation by the Department of Food and Agriculture, tiered licenses and fees, and appellations. And the fact that that the Department of Food and Agriculture was the issuing agency in and of itself, the alternative reality that we could be living is that this would be coming from the Board of Pharmaceuticals. That was the bill that we were debating and ultimately successful in shelving in 2014 was a bill that would have, I don't even know what it would have looked like if the Board of Pharmaceuticals was writing rules for agriculture. It probably wouldn't have been something that we would have been as familiar with. And so the fact that it came from CDFA is critical. And then seeing the tiers, seeing the differences in these fees here is pretty, 40,000 is a low fee from a national perspective. In Maryland, you're looking at a baseline 250,000 application fee. So the fees in general are pretty low, but the fact that you're going to be able to get a state license to cultivate up to 2,500 square feet of greenhouse for $1,000 is pretty solid to me. Like, I think that's something that a lot of folks, I'm not saying there's not a lot of other associated costs. Regulation is not going to be easy or affordable by any means, but the fees and seeing tiered licenses played out, even in the other sections. The statute doesn't have tiers of dispensary licenses, but it does have tiered fees based on volume. And manufacturers have volume-based tiers. And so we saw that concept of tiering really, really stick front and center, which, with regard to the core mission of ensuring a diversity of businesses, small and independent businesses, making sure that those types of businesses aren't just priced out is a baseline consideration. And then I'll say, you know, the other part that really, really makes me happy is the water section. It's a pretty common sense 21st century approach. I can't wait to hear what the water board has to say and to hear Trey's perspective and whatnot from working on it. In my opinion, it is sort of solution oriented. It's always clunky to implement these things, but it feels a lot better than some of the stuff I was working on with, you know, ranchers and timber companies in the past. It actually feels like it's meant to be user friendly, even if it's not totally implemented perfect. Yep.
Exactly. You discussed non-compliance, like if you're legal and you go 10 plants over, and also if you're totally non-compliant outside the system, or maybe you're being fined or executed
I'm thankful to say that I don't think executions are high on the list, but you know, stranger things have happened. So if you're in the system, if you're a verifiable licensed grower, and you did something wrong, actually the CDFA has about 10 pages. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a chart, and there's minor, moderate, serious, and it has either the code section or the statute or reg, depending. And so I'll just pick an example here. Failure to maintain accurate and comprehensive records regarding cannabis waste that account for, reconcile, and evidence all activity related to the generation and disposal or disposition of cannabis waste. That is California Commercial Regs 8305. It is a moderate infraction, and the fine will range from $1,000 to $5,000. And so there's, like I said, about 10 pages of these. So if you're a licensed grower, they made it quite, the other agencies didn't do this. I actually thought it was really helpful of them that they went through and charted out every single possible infraction. If you're an unlicensed grower, just somebody who decided to stay in the black market, we would look to the statute that is in Prop 64 primarily, because Prop 64 changed a number of the penalties and criminal codes related to cannabis activity. Because we don't have that in reg form, it's hard for me to say with the level of specificity. It does start out, generally speaking, as civil, which means that it's fines, but you can move back into the criminal arena pretty quickly, especially with repeat offenses. So staying out of the regulatory environment, you can still end up in jail. It might take a cycle or two through the court system, but it's looser than it was, but still similar. We'll see what the regs look like when they come out. If you are licensed in, like I said, the fees, there's a 100 to 500, a 500 to 1,000, and a 1,000 to 5,000. Those are the three tiers of fines. There are a few fines that are much higher. Environmental enhancement crimes, SB 165 in 2015. And actually there was a bill we worked on back in 2011 too. But there are a few enhanced fines. You know, for example, the one that they have listed in here is up to $30,000. That's for egregious known damages to a waterway. I'm okay with that. Don't screw up the creeks, you guys. There's a number of those as well, but so that's sort of a snapshot of I think where it's going to get really messy is for people who are licensed in but are caught doing something outside. I would really strongly advise against mixing the two currents of commerce. And frankly, of course, I advise against unregulated commercial cannabis activity in general. Anybody else? We almost caught up despite the traffic that who knew there would be traffic on Sunday morning? I mean, I guess it's like a thing that always happens, but questions, comments? Nope. In closing, I'll just say it is time, right? 9:30? Or 10:30 rather. Awesome. Yeah, okay, cool.
Talk about track and trace and how that's supposed to work? We won't let you get out of here without that.
Track and trace. So like I mentioned, we did lose the fight on individual plant tagging. We fought bitterly against individual plant tagging because like it just doesn't make sense. And here's my personal frustration with it. Like, you guys have grown some cannabis plants before. Some of them are small. They make an ounce. Some of them are large. They make 10 pounds. That's 160 ounces. If you have one tag that's supposed to tell the state roughly how much to expect, but you have that variation, how is the state going to have any clue what the expected yield is? And so in other agricultural sectors, standard variability of yield is a very important concept. How much will this plant vary by yield? In cannabis, it's just simply too extreme to give any. So the plant tags, not only are they a pain in our mornings, they're also completely ineffective. And so we were hoping to shift to a batch and lot system. You know, we proposed 100 square feet as a lot, and any number of lots grown consistently with consistent fertilizer, pest management on a consistent harvest cycle as a batch. So you'd have, you know, if you had a 1,200 square foot greenhouse, you'd have 12 lots inside of one greenhouse batch. The good thing is I think we're moving in that direction. I would say that probably by 2022 we're going to be there. But, you know, 2022 doesn't help anybody in year one, so the RFID chip makers are all over Sacramento. They have, surprisingly enough, or maybe not, I don't know, I'm still sort of an idealistic, but the RFID chip makers are spending more on lobbyists than the growers are, because 4 million RFID chips a year at 30 cents a piece, we're talking serious revenue off of one contract. So there will be unique identifiers that will be applied to every flowering plant. Any plant that is destroyed you have to chip it with something else and make it so that it's less than 50% cannabis by volume. And then you have to account for the waste. Things that move forward, and so that puts those unique identifiers to rest. Things that move forward will parent out into other unique parent-child relationships with other unique identifiers. Everything all the way through will be stamped and tagged and scannable. Ultimately, there will be a lot of barcodes that go into, or RFI, or QR codes that go into California's cannabis marketplace, like millions and millions and millions of codes. The Department of Food and Agriculture is in charge of procuring the software solution. They had an RFP, a request for proposals, that was out, that they just modified about a week ago. And so we did request modifications to the RFP. They, of course, want to know how much the program is going to cost. That's a big part of procuring this type of software. And they have an above-the-line section and a below-the-line section. And above the line is the cost to the state, and below the line is the cost to others. Notably the growers in this case, right? Because if the state's not going to buy the tags and give them to you for free, then the grower's going to buy the tag. And so as originally proposed, the state was not considering the below-the-line cost. And so a program that only cost a few million to the state could offset a lot of the expenses of the program to the licensee and make their revenue by selling tags. And so we were able to get them to consider both the above-the-line and the below-the-line cost in considering which company to contract with. That way, if they get a proposal for $10 million, but it relies on growers to chip in $14 million a year to pencil, we're not getting stuck with the price tag while they're ignoring it. They're considering both costs, even the ones that aren't coming out of the state treasury now. And so they amended that. They have 6 companies that have put bids in. We should know. I'm still going to pretend that I'm hopeful that we'll see the contract in mid-June. Realistically, I think we're probably out to like an early August before we know who gets that contract. We probably won't know a whole heck of a lot about the details of what it's going to look like until as late as September. So be nimble and agile, and when tags are ready, be ready to get tags is the best advice I can give. But it's going to be a bit more onerous than I think it needs to be, and the challenge is it's onerous in a way that's not actually producing positive outcomes to the state. Like it's jump through hoops for the sake of jumping through hoops. The current budget proposal has much better language in our opinion. So there's, I talked about all the different ways this conversation could go now that the governor and the legislature are involved, and track and trace is one of those things that's definitely in flux. We've been working on it quite a bit. So we'll see if law enforcement's ready to believe us. Yes.
I have a track and trace question.
Oh, good.
Regarding outdoor harvest. A lot of us harvest in tiers. We harvest the crop, and we wait a couple of weeks. But how will we manage that with the crop?
Yeah, that's another reason that we think the harvest batch system is so important, because then you have your harvest batch where, okay, we had November 2nd. We brought in tops from 9 different lots. There's our November 2nd harvest batch. And then, November 17th, it's windy and rainy, so you got to pull the rest of them down. You go take the rest, and then you've got your harvest batch number 2, and you've got all your different lots. Where, and the plant thing just doesn't actually work in California. It worked really great in other states that were starting from scratch, and especially, when you're growing little sea of green indoor, cool. You chop the thing down, you hang it up, you're good. But that's not how we grow, and so we definitely are working on it. We think the statute is going to change, but like I said, these reflect the seeds we planted in September of 2014. So if we get the statute changed in September of 2017, we're 3 years out from seeing it on the ground. B, put it in your comment letter. We need to tell them all about it and make sure that they know. And the other thing that I'm encouraging people as they review and write comments is that we have the ability, because we have the tiering of type 1, 2, and 3, specialty, small, medium, and because we have indoor, outdoor, mixed flight, we could say, hey, this per plant thing is appropriate for the indoor column, but it doesn't work for the outdoor column. And so start thinking in terms of designating regulations and specific requirements in terms of both scale as well as growing practice. The reason that we gave them proposed such a complicated matrix of licenses is so that we would have the ability to fine-tune things like this. And so I think that, every single person who writes a comment letter that is concerned about this issue should mention that, and ultimately we're going to just cross our fingers and hope they hear us, and if they don't hear us, we're going to say it louder and keep saying it. Anyone want to get the last one? Awesome.
Can you talk about our county not having the regulations in place for us to be able to apply to January 1st and what that might mean for us as growers?
I mean, I can talk about it, and I've talked about it so much, it doesn't seem to be helping at all when I talk about it, though. At this point, you've got the will of the people twice, W and 64, both showing that the voters of Nevada County were generally on board. You've got an amazingly effective, well-organized community that's being beyond reasonable from my perspective. I work with 15 different local advocacy groups around the state, and the Alliance out here is being reasonable. They're diligent. I don't know what good talking about it's going to do. I think we are seeing progress, though. I mean, the last couple of months, the consultant's been brought on. They're working toward the advisory group. I think that they are getting closer to moving. There are a few things that have happened that should make it slightly more streamlined if they do decide to get on board. And so, we still have that sort of June of 2017. If there's not something tangible by then you guys are forced to make that difficult decision about what do you do this growing season. That makes me squirm a little bit thinking about that, because I'm the kind of person where things should make sense, and it just doesn't make sense to me anymore. I'll go back to what I said. I think one of the first times I was out here, which is it's going to take a lot of time for people's minds to change, especially some of the folks that it was a trip to me. Like, I grew up knowing that reefer madness was nonsense, but not everyone did. Like, some people grew up like that was really honestly true. And that's a heck of a journey to make, to be able to cycle through letting go of core beliefs like that. And so I can talk about it, but I don't know if it'll do us any good. So we'll keep trying. All right. On that note, I'm going to put all of this paperwork away. I do have a couple reports here if anybody wants to know all of the 60-plus bills. How fun is that? We just talked for a whole hour and didn't even mention the 60-plus cannabis-related bills that are moving through the state legislature. That's super exciting. I can get you links and everything to all of these documents. Talk to Diana if you want to be on conference calls. We do have a very rigorous conference call schedule set up to fine-tooth comb through all of this stuff. As I mentioned, June 12th is your comment deadline. Their websites, each of the 3 agencies, has great information about how to submit those comments, how to prepare them, some hints about making them most useful. They are required by law to read and respond in writing to all of your comments. So get your comments out there. They will consider them. Amber wanted me to pass along that sooner is better. You have until June 12th, but the sooner you can get them to them, the more time they have to turn it over and consider it. They'd like to have everything reviewed and have revised regs out quite quickly after June 12th. This is not going to get any easier in the next couple of years, you guys, but I think at the end of the day, we'll have something we can all be really, truly, I don't want to say proud, but satisfied with. You know, we are on the verge of doing something pretty historic, I think, in regulating this crop in a way that it's friendly to fish, to small farms, to small businesses. And I just really appreciate you being here, your commitment to this transition. And it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be a lot of challenges. A lot of folks aren't going to make the transition. And that is why we need to keep working together, both within our community, but also outside across the state with other organizations in our community, etc. Really tremendously, one more time, appreciate Circle. The work that you guys are doing out here is phenomenal, and appreciate all of you guys. And I'll be around all day, so let me know.